Welcome to the August 17th. So a day later than normal. It's going to be extra special. PFF forecast. Got a great show. We're going to talk preseason betting. We just have to. If you're not a degenerate that bets the preseason, it's okay. There'll be something for you as well. We're going to talk about the things that are out there that still give you an edge, specifically the types of data points and insights that we use on a week-to-week basis that we believe are not as well baked into the market that can give you an edge as well. So if you're prepping for the season, kind of putting your game plan together, we hope this will be an informative and useful podcast that we can kind of come back to and reference as we go along. So it'll be a great show. Let's rock. Okay, we were going to spend a solid 90 minutes debriefing Zeke and Dalvin Cook and the seismic change that has made to the AFC East. But I got a lot of pushback from you two. You guys didn't want to do that.
I mean, it's shaking up the entire AFC conference. Forget the AFC East. The balance of power in the NFL has forever been changed after the massive signings of Zeke and Dalvin this past week.
I really thought we should just split, one podcast into, each player because they each deserve that time. But look, we have to give a shout here to Brad, who gave out Ramondre Stevenson under 1,000 yards, probably like a month ago when Lenny Fournette came for a visit. We had a whole discussion about, even if it's not Lenny, the Patriots are going to be signing another running back. Hammered the under there. It's now at 850, as if we didn't know that, obviously that was signaling that the Patriots are looking to bring in another back. And I mean, talk about some value there. 150 yards is pretty sweet.
That's why you listen to the podcast. That's also why you join the Printing Press Discord. If you're not yet a member, go get yourself involved. I was with some members of the press this past week. I was traveling, visiting different parts of the world, met some members of the press, handed out a couple of Printing Press hats. There is a lot of excitement about the Guess the Lines contest, palpable excitement, I would say. So get yourself involved and come start something that I think is going to be really cool, which is the Guess the Lines competition that we're going to have starting this year. If you didn't know, we guess the lines every single Sunday night right after football. And it's an incredibly fun part of the podcast. We bet the things that we disagree with the market on, and then we like to compare how we do every single week. We're obviously, I was excited to be the winner last year. We'll see if I can regain the crown. I'm not afraid to jinx myself there. But come get involved. The link is in the description of the YouTube channel and on Twitter. So go join the Printing Press Discord and get yourself some merch and join a great community. Okay, let's start with preseason football. The key to preseason football is knowing who's going to play and how much they're going to play, right? And that's why we have insider Schefter, Brad Spielberger, to enlighten us, to inform us on who we can count on putting the helmet on this blessed preseason week.
Yeah, so week 2 ahead. A lot of teams now use week 2 as kind of the one big tune-up. They skip week 1, they skip week 3, they play a lot of starters. However, the Detroit Lions are not playing any of their dudes, had some injuries to some players as well. So even a guy like Jameson Williams, who is not a starter for week 1, is not going to play in this game. And the Jaguars, we know, are playing guys. So they are -4, but we already know one team is playing a bunch of starters, one team is not. The Jaguars plan to do so. The Lions don't. So I like that play. And then a second one, the Bills and the Steelers, who are playing against each other, have both come out and said they're going to play starters for about a quarter and a half or maybe the entire first half. The over there at 42 is the highest total of any game I've seen so far. I don't see a halftime over-under or a spread bet available yet, but I remember seeing them last week. So keep an eye out. If 42 is high for a preseason game, but there's 41s, there's 40s, 39s and a half out there. If you can get a decent first half over under, I would maybe lean towards taking it over. With both offenses, we know going to play the majority of their guys for maybe the entire first half.
I'm looking here at the slate and was thinking about this. So who's playing starters, I think, is really interesting. I was trying to think about who's going to play backups that we know have done well, kind of looking at how they've graded, how they've performed, that might give us some sense of like, okay, I can count on this team kind of showing up once the starters go out. Honestly, I thought about that and then kind of looked through and wasn't sure that I could really come up with a strong take other than our guy, Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Now, that game kicks in like 15 minutes from when we're recording this. So this will either be a gleaming take. The Cleveland Browns are +3.5 against the Philadelphia Eagles, or an absolute disaster. But I think there's a case to be made that Dorian Thompson-Robinson is the player of the preseason. I don't know, Brad, if the Eagles have any reason to play any starters or do anything of value in this game.
I doubt it. I doubt it. You got Marcus Mariota though. If you're a Mariota guy, he should get some time.
I think there's also
good.
Yeah, I think there's also a difference between who the backups are, and meaning, let's take an example like the Chiefs, and I do like the Cardinals at 7.5 here. The Chiefs, they're not going to show anything on tape. They know they've got, Mahomes. Maybe they'll get some reps for the offense. They'll try out some new things, but they're not, as we used to say, like Andy's not calling the good plays here. It's the preseason. And then the backups, like if Blaine Gabbert's getting a bunch of run, it's like, it's very different than a young guy who's really trying to either earn a roster spot or what Blaine Gabbert is. Even if he is playing, it's like, who knows what they're going to call? Who knows what the offense is going to look like? They're not going to be trying as they would in a regular season game. For that reason, I'm going to take the Cardinals just because a 7.5 point spread. I don't care who the teams are in a preseason game in which really no one's got a lot to play for. That margin is too high, especially when the totals are so low. It really is irrelevant kind of what the talent is on the other side of the Cardinals. 7.5 is just too much. And on the flip side of that, using the same logic, I like a team like the Patriots, who've just got 4 quarterbacks. Yes, 4 quarterbacks, I think, trying to prove something. They're all trying to earn a roster spot. I think it's going to be more of let them unleash as opposed to just get some reps in. I think that kind of mindset lends it to, an aggressive offense that's actually trying to put up points. I like the Patriots as well at, +2.5, even by the money line, any sort of Patriot bet. They're playing the Packers. It's 2.5 right now.
So you're not scared of Shane Bichelle?
No.
He doesn't put the fear of God in you. The Cardinals, by the way, were they need to put something good on film. So, the motivation is certainly there. I think there is something to be said for any of these spreads that are kind of well over 3. Even if a team is playing starters for a quarter and a half, maybe even a half, there's a lot of ball game left and a lot of weirdness that can happen. So, I look at Cowboys, Seahawks. Seahawks are -7, Cowboys are +7. Obviously, that says a lot about which team is going to play starters and for how long. I guess my question to you guys is do you really think it matters that much, right? The starters are going out there. Starters don't want to get hurt. Let's be clear. And you're playing backups who are playing for their jobs. 7, your point about the Cardinals as well against the Chiefs, that's just a lot of points, even if starters are playing a quarter, even more than a quarter, right?
It's too many points. I will say one thing that I think ties into this a little bit and is an edge I've found to a degree, somewhat anecdotally, but the backup quarterbacks that we're talking about, I think people fall in love with rookies or young guys from recent draft classes they like. The Matt Barkleys and whatever of the world that come in and play a quarter and a half, 2 quarters, bet those guys. Bet the Colt McCoy. I don't know if he's playing for the Cardinals, has an injury, but those type of backups, the Cooper Rush in Dallas for that throw in there. Yeah, those guys are actually who you want to bet on more than, Stetson Bennett's going to get some run and have 4 turnover-worthy plays in 15 dropbacks. But he's a fun, plucky, 27-year-old from Georgia.
Yeah, it's a great call. It's almost like the 4A phenomenon in baseball. where it's like a guy who's, too good for AAA but not good enough for the majors and like excels in like certain spots. Like I love that point for NFL preseason. There's so many guys, honestly, at multiple positions too. If we ever would get prop bets or something like that, but I love that take.
Yeah, and you can find all this data on PFF.com with the PFF Plus subscription. By the way, right now you can get the draft kit and all the draft tools, including the live draft assistant, for free with an annual subscription. Go to PFF.com right this very moment. But you can see the grades for all of the preseason games. So I'll give you a little kind of look here. Some of the quarterbacks that have graded really, really well. You've got a Matt Barkley, who currently has the highest grade of any quarterback through the preseason. Aiden O'Connell, Davis Mills. We've talked about Dorian Thompson-Robinson, a little Nick Mullins sighting with Minnesota, my guy, Jameis Winston. So, it is a really good point. And you can look at that across different positions and then kind of, identify, okay, this team's got some players who are going to make an impact, not as starters, but as backups, and who are going to be playing their butts off. Because, for a backup quarterback, this is their time. So I think it really is a great point. The Matt Barkley one, you just talked about the Steelers, right? So the Steelers, interestingly, also have two quarterbacks who have graded really well in Rudolph and Pickett, Barkley and Allen. Like, you talk about that over, Brad. I think it's really interesting because for that to go over, you're banking on the starters, but I think you're almost banking more on the guys that are coming in after them being able to continue to put up points, as opposed to just kind of falling off completely.
100%.
Yeah. If we can get a split up by half there, I think, George, as you're suggesting, I think the second half over is probably where the value is going to be. If they're like pricing in that total from the starters, I really think the backups are where there's value.
Yeah.
Any other preseason bets before we move on? Great. That's a perfect transition into where you can bet on preseason games, which is DraftKings Sportsbook. They also have the largest best ball tournament in DraftKings history, $10 million in guaranteed cash prizes up for grabs right now with Best Ball Millionaire Contest. Use promo code PFF when you sign up. Get your first entry fee back in DK dollars with promo code PFF. It's just that easy. So go download the app right now. If you're new to this whole thing, Best Ball means you draft, and then your draft is all that matters because the top scoring players count towards your team every single week. There's no ads, no drops, no trades, no should have playeds. It's all about, can you win your draft? So go to DraftKings.com or download the DraftKings app right now. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Age and eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. See DraftKings.com for details. Also, our good friends at Manscaped. I was just traveling, guys. I was in New York. I was hoping to see both of you. You both avoided me. I don't know. We'll talk about that later. But it's kind of muggy and humid in New York. Some of you who live there may know. Let me tell you that if you show up with too much hair in wrong places in New York and you're trying to ride the subway and you're trying to go out at night, please stay home. Do not do that. Or go to Manscaped, get yourself 20% off with promo code PFF plus free shipping and be a part of Smooth Sack Summer. The Manscaped Performance Package 4.0 has everything that you need for that summer bod. To be perfectly honest, if I couldn't have traveled with my Manscaped Performance Package, it would not have been a pleasant trip. But because the battery life is fantastic, I had a wonderful time. The humidity did not bother me one bit. That's also because I'm built different, but I'm sure you are too. Manscaped.com, 20% off, promo code PFF. Go get yourself a little bit of that relief from the summer heat with Manscaped. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about how, as we're setting up, we're heading towards the season, what are the data points? What are the kind of pieces of analysis that we feel we can rely on, I guess, particularly early, in the week, right before the market may have brought some of that insight into the line and bake it into the line, that we still can rely on, because the market gets sharper, bettors are getting sharper. I remember when PFF grades were something that the market wasn't baking in. And, back when Eric and I were starting to do this, the first model we built, it was really our edge was PFF grades, and we did very, very well. And the market wises up; they start baking that in. I can say with definitive confidence, I know this for a fact, that the people that are making the lines, the traders at sportsbooks, use a lot of this data, right? They're using PFF data. They're using as much of the publicly available data and privately available data as they can. But there certainly are still things out there. So this will help us as we prepare for the season. If you're putting together kind of a game plan for how you want to bet this year, you can write these things down. You can go get the data from pff.com. You can also find them in Judah and Brad's writing, and we'll obviously talk about them on this podcast. So Judah, this was your idea for a segment. It's a great idea. I'll kind of let you kick it off and talk about some of the research that you've been doing and what you've been finding.
Yeah, so I'm working on a piece right now as part of this kind of quarterback trait series on scrambling. And I guess this will kind of serve as a preview. But by scrambling, I don't mean plays that cross the line of scrimmage. I mean plays in which a quarterback attempts to scramble. And I think the reason it's a pretty, it's a deep dive. It's a very long article as it currently stands. And part of what I'm trying to focus on is studying the interactions of a scrambling quarterback and how that kind of plays out with different coverages or pass rush, offensive line, and receivers. And kind of the main finding here is that a good scrambler can kind of mitigate a good coverage unit. I'm using perfectly covered plays as sort of a metric there, where if you are, Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson or even Justin Fields, if you're going up against a top defense or pass defense, that matchup matters less than you were if you're a Jared Goff or a Matthew Stafford. So too, we can do this for all of the sort of position groups where like people who run on scrambles, again, Lamar Jackson, Justin Fields, are going to mitigate a pass rush. I think that's fairly intuitive. Whereas guys like Justin Herbert, who are great scramblers by this definition, kind of struggle more against good pass rush. So if you're going up against the Niners and they've got a good pass rush, you want to nick them down a little bit. Conversely, I think this is probably the best example. It's pass blocking. Really, if you're a good scrambler, you can really mitigate the effects of a bad offensive line up to just basically Mahomes Super Bowl level, where if your offensive line is really bad, it's not going to make a difference. But if a Chiefs left tackle goes down, early in the week, let's say, that means something very different than if Penei Sewell goes down and Jared Goff's without his left tackle, because the scrambler is much more kind of independent of his circumstance and his situation than the opposite. So I think a lot is looking at injuries in midseason, and also to some extent futures markets, where it's if some team got better, let's stick with this offensive line example, that matters more for a quarterback who doesn't scramble very well, just because his situation, that situation matters a lot more than a scrambler who is more situation agnostic. So studying these interactions, which I do not think are priced into books, number one, because this data is only available through PFF and a sort of advanced level. No one knows how to define a scramble. These are the sorts of things that are certainly not priced in, and actually studying the interactions and being able to kind of pinpoint the certain traits that match with different facets of the game, and to say okay, we actually have a decent sense of how this will play out, I think is super, super valuable.
Couldn't agree more. Brad, what do you think?
Yeah, so let Judah go first. We were just talking pre-show. I think my biggest takeaway is a recent article that Judah himself wrote last year with Ben Brown about explosive plays and just examining how explosive plays impact drives. I would say the biggest kind of takeaway I had last year was looking early on at explosive play rate at a team level. And if it seemed like there was just an unsustainable level of explosive plays, for example, you mentioned Justin Fields in your spiel there. The Bears had a very high, it's not just the amount of explosive plays, but basically explosive runs and passes per dropback or per carry. The first 6 weeks of the season, when they were 3-2, 3-3, whatever, was really high. And it was clearly unsustainably high, where they were breaking off a lot of these, these plays where, look, you see the stats if you win the turnover battle, you win 80% of games, yada, yada. I think there is almost a microcosm of, look, good offenses are going to generate a large number and a high rate of explosive plays. But I think early in a season, you can see, and of course you are tying back to your priors, but you can see where, hey, this is not what we expected this team at all. And maybe they are they're having these splash plays that are swinging games. And the example I mentioned to Judah was the Bengals 2 years ago were top 5 in EPA per play, but were 23rd in success rate. And last year, they were top 5 in EPA per play again. They were first or second in success rate. Like it was not just that they were doing, the great things, the T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, but also they were able to actually sustain drives if they needed to and win in different ways. So yeah, it really look early in the season, as we all know, there's some fluky results, there's some crazy things that happen. And to me, it's just another, I think the market has caught up to EPA per play and has caught up to looking at things on a drive level and things like that. But you can further kind of piece things apart. And I think that is a big one, is realizing there's just a few snaps have kind of distorted the reality of actual games. And it's not going to get captured in an overall, EPA per play stat.
It's a good point. I was really excited for this topic because I actually think this is something that we should, and I love that you're doing this, Judah, this offseason to kind of go back and take a look at this. But we should continue to, kind of mine for those things to stay ahead, right? So I'll bring up a couple that are from, research that we've done, and then a few that I think I've learned this offseason as well. But let me start with kind of an oldie but goodie. And this is a basic kind of PFF data point that definitely does not get baked in, and that is turnover-worthy throw percentage. People are looking at interceptions and not looking at the underlying cause of interceptions, which is, are you throwing interceptable passes? That is we've studied this. It is so true. It is so much more stable than interceptions. It's not even remotely close. And that's not quite the same as touchdowns, right? Big time throws, our highest graded throws, those can happen anywhere on the field. So they don't necessarily, they're more stable than touchdown rate, but it's not necessarily a predictor of touchdowns, right? As interceptions and turnover-worthy throws are, right? So when we grade a turnover-worthy throw, it doesn't matter whether the pass is caught by the defender. All that we're looking at is the pass so bad that it should have been a turnover? Does it hit, the defender in the hands? Does it hit him in the helmet? What was it that led to the actual result? And the result doesn't matter. So that is one that I bring up. And then a kind of corollary on the other side, now that sack props are available, and Brad, you did a fantastic job, I think, all of last year highlighting this. Sacks are an incredibly unstable thing as well. And this has been one of the things that I think PFF has done as good of a job as any, and I still don't think it's baked in, which is pressures and pressure rate are way more indicative of being a good pass rusher than our actual sacks and sack results. And so those are two that I wanted to highlight because they're actually pretty simple. You can take advantage of them with a PFF subscription. Like, you don't need to have a data science degree, and you can go out and kind of have fun with them. So those are my first two. I'll let you guys kind of go around the horn. I have one more that I feel like I've learned about more recently that I'm excited to talk about. But Judah, more on your end. What else are you thinking about here?
I'll say a couple of things. I'm glad you brought up sacks. This is a market that I paid attention to a lot last year. I mean, Arjun and I we had our Sunday morning. We'd brainstorm our sack props. I think this is a general point, which is there's a lot of value to be had in just studying the markets and trying to source the pricing and where it's coming from. And it's not that complex sometimes. In something like a sack market, the inputs were very obviously previous sacks, as you were saying, and pressures are valuable there. It also was taking into account offensive line strength and not the quarterbacks. So it's like we'd be betting on, Justin Fields, whoever team was playing Justin Fields a bunch and whichever edge guys were there, because Justin Fields takes a lot of sacks. Fields might not be the best example because his offensive line is pretty bad too. But you can have Jalen Hurts. The Eagles have the best offensive line in football. I don't think anyone's denying that, or at the very least they're top 5. He would take a ton of sacks. That's part of his play style when he's trying to, on scrambles, extend plays and find open guys. So actually just paying attention to markets and learning the inputs and then being like, actually I can tell what this is pricing and I disagree with that. That's very valuable. The other thing I'll talk about is that, even just taking a general look, you can, as the market evolves, you can either continue to kind of innovate in these ways and use that to, bet spreads or whatever else you're betting, or you can kind of say like, no, I'll actually start to attack different markets. And this is obviously something that I've been keen on doing. I didn't bet a single side or total all of last season, leaning into alternate lines and same parlay stuff. And that kind of shifts the equation also to like focusing more. And this is kind of like a hybrid, fantasy type of like the man zone stuff that was at the base of so many of the same game parlays that I wrote last year, which was based on an article that Origin and I wrote last summer, which essentially had like two main takeaways. Number one, that man is reflective of the talent on the field. Good wide receivers will beat cornerbacks and vice versa. That is less true in zone. So when you're looking at something like a matchup builder, if that team's playing a lot of man, that means something very different than if they're playing a lot of zone. And the second is that targets are more predictable in man. So like when Justin Jefferson has a matchup in man coverage against the bad corner, he is going to get the ball. And when you're looking at like even Justin Jefferson, like the targets are not always consistent. He's going to have some dud games. Those almost never happen against man coverage. So kind of taking those contextual factors and attacking that in specific markets, which are not necessarily just like, okay, I have this information, but like Vikings can lose and Justin Jefferson can go for 150 yards, but actually using that and saying, okay, maybe I'll build the same game parlay. I'll attack props. I'll bet some alt lines. Some alt prop lines, all of those things, kind of taking a holistic view and saying, I've got a particular thesis on either a player or a team, and then finding the specific market for which that best fit, I think is still hugely valuable and not priced in effectively across markets.
Yeah. So yeah, you touched on a thought I had there. I do have one that's certainly not a new thought, but I think there is a common thread in that, like what we're looking at or what you think you should look at, for example, the sack props. I don't even look at the offensive line matchup. I look at the quarterback's time to throw, or I look at other, I use other data points to get me to that conclusion. In the same vein, look, this is not a new thought, but I still think people early on in the football season, they see a defense that has good results in the box score or things of that nature, and don't just appreciate who are the quarterbacks that they've played so far, and then who are the quarterbacks that they're going to play in the near future or that week in particular. Because as we know, like the opposing quarterback, I'm not a defense doesn't matter guy. I'm not quite that far on the spectrum. But to a degree, like, again, kind of anecdotally, but like the Niners probably are one of the best defenses in the NFL. I think the best EPA per dropback half in the entire NFL last year was Patrick Mahomes in San Francisco. And again, it's not a magic cure-all every time, but I think we fall for that trap every year. You'll see low totals with a team that the Commanders are a good defense, but you just go look at who they've played, go look at their slate of opponents at quarterback in particular, and keep that in the back of your mind. And particularly this is for totals. And I think in weeks 7 to 12, you're going to see a ton of value because there's overreactions to the first month and a half of a team season where they probably just had an easy slate of opposing QBs.
No, it's a good point. It's actually kind of dovetails into the last one, but this is a thing for everyone to remember. You don't have to bet every single line. You don't. But the person pricing them does, right? Every sportsbook out there is betting every line, right? They're setting every line. To do that well, you're not going to be able to deep dive into each specific situation, right? Because then you're going to ignore certain other bets. So the bettor has the advantage of you can go super deep in a game or a particular situation or a particular type of bet that the sportsbook can't, right? And I think too often that's not appreciated enough, where it highlights to me what in particular you do, Judah, which is going really deep into a specific few games and really trying to create an instrument by which to take advantage of something, right? And that's not something that, the sportsbook is going to be able to price. I take this now to kind of the same game parlay market. I think one of the things that we can do to give us an advantage, and Judah, you already do a fair amount of this, I think we should look at how we can do this more broadly, is often things are priced based on a macro trend in the league. So I'll give you the best example of this. Generally, teams winning by a large margin are positively correlated with that team having a high number of rushing yards, right? Generally, a team losing is correlated with that team having a higher number of passing yards. That is true at a macro level, and that's generally going to be how these lines are constructed. But if you can find something, a team that reliably breaks that mold, that is not going to be priced for that specific team. In other words, the book has to account for everyone in the league. And so it doesn't make sense for them to try and account for specific situations, specific teams. And that is something that you can do because you don't have to bet every single bet that's out there. And you can kind of focus, and it's actually reminds me of what Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett always preach, which is, everyone's out there telling you to diversify your portfolio. Why? Like, don't if you want to diversify your portfolio, buy a freaking index fund. If you actually want to do something with your investment and want to make it unique, you should find one or two things that you actually know that you go deeper on than anyone else, and then put a big bet on those things. That's what you should do. If you're just diversifying and you're an average investor, guess what? You're a moron. You're not going to beat the market. You might as well just buy an index fund. So I know that feels like a TED talk, but that was kind of the mission that I've set out for myself. And I think you guys do a good job of it. But for those of you that are out there that are listening, I think many of you are very smart and have the ability to, I think, do really well. Smart's the wrong term, hardworking, that have the ability to kind of, I think, be profitable and really enjoy this. And I think that's something to remember as we set out in this football season.
Well, one last thought that's connected to everything you just said, which I think is spot on for sure. And I like when you connect things to non-football and kind of bring that in. I think it gives a different perspective. But just we're gassing up Judah further and further. But I do think also when you focus on a smaller pool of games, the live market, both in the overall game, but also derivatives, is also, you can take more advantage of it because you're prepared for, scripted plays and things of that nature that Judah obviously made a killing on last year. I do. I was definitely in the early days of betting. I probably bet 12 games a Sunday, and now it's 3 or 4. But I also know there are 1 and 2 in particular that the bet I placed pregame is not the last bet that's going to be placed on that game, by any stretch.
Yeah, it's interesting. Also, and this is just coming to mind through the discussion. I think people also like to separate markets where it's like fantasy is one thing, daily fantasy is another, whatever, like circa, survive, like all these things are separate. I think like instrumental in I just speak for myself, like my own process. I realized I was much better, George, at what you're saying about like picking off lines when I was having way more success in like DraftKings showdown slates, which are just taking one game and attacking it one game, as opposed to like an 11 or 12 game Sunday slate where I was just like kind of lost in the noise. And like, quite frankly, like I had a lot of success early on, and then I like stopped being profitable and I like stopped playing that. And I realized like actually like showdowns are like, there's something about my process that lends itself to, being successful in showdowns. I think there are kind of 2 takeaways from that. Number one, I don't think like your process has to be something that like you yourself create. Like, I don't think you can just like copy someone else's process and just like, there's something lost in the transmission where it's like, if you're like Bill Belichick, I think it's a perfect example, actually. It's like, no one's been able to repeat the Belichick, Belichick school. Like, had so many failed coaches. And I think by each of the kind of like Mike Shanahan tree and the Kyle Shanahan, like they all have their own kind of unique spins off of that. It's not just like replicating what Bill Belichick does. You can't really do that. The second thing is like, I wouldn't be afraid to cross markets and see what like the same process for me that kind of worked for DraftKings, daily fantasy and showdowns. I'm like, wait a second, this actually really applies to same game parlays and other markets of that sort. That like actually like, looking to other places of information and using that as insight is super, super helpful. And it's also an angle that books are not going to be pricing in, because like when they're setting their model, it's like they've got a prop model, they've got this. Each market has its own thing. It might be kind of an iteration of the same thing, but it is distinct in its own way. And using information from different markets, sourcing that and like putting it against each other to form some narrative is, I think, hugely valuable and important.
I will push back a little bit. I think what you're saying is, there's this phrase, you own what you help create. And I think that's It's very much what you're getting at. It's like, unless you helped create it, it's very hard for you to truly own it. But the piece I'll push back on a little bit is you got to get ideas from somewhere. And yeah, it helps to be an independent thinker, but it also helps to have an appreciation and understanding of history. Like I think this happens. Investors actually talk about this a lot, where they spend a lot of time, looking at history, learning from what other people did, borrowing concepts, and in other words, kind of stealing those and then making them their own, building them into their process. So I agree with you. You have to kind of own it, right? You have to create it, but that doesn't mean that you can't go out and borrow things or steal things from others that have done it in the past. Because if you don't, then you're just ignoring a bunch of stuff that's out there. And I'm sure you
100%. I was saying, you're making my point clearly. Better than I am is just like, you should be taking, like 10% of this and 10% of that, and like whatever kind of fits that, forms your own process. I 100% agree with that.
There's, one other thing that came to mind as we were talking about here, someone that deserves a shout out, certainly Robbie Greer, who has done some work for PFF in the past. And if he had more time on his hands, would continue to do more work with us. But he has a website. You can follow him. I think it's R Greer. I'm blanking on exactly what his Twitter.
I think R Greer NFL.
Yeah. The NFL ELO app is the site.
Yeah, NFL ELO app. And he's got a ton of really good free resources on there that everyone should check out. But he has a really good, he brings this up at least once a year, which is the kind of mispricing of backup quarterbacks when a backup quarterback is playing on a good offense. So the offense and the supporting cast, the Chiefs are a great example of this. Like that's the tide that lifts the boat of the backup quarterback. And it's not the same as a backup quarterback coming in on a team that's average or below average. I think that's always a good one to remember. We've certainly benefited from that one in the past. I think the one that most recently comes to mind, certainly the Niners have always been a good example of that. But Cooper Rush and the Cowboys, I think, was a good example of that as well. So that's one other one that I'll throw in there, and definitely a good follow if you're looking for things. The reason I bring up Robbie is he's a big proponent. He talks about this a lot, which is unless you feel you have something that is not being accounted for by the market, then your opinion doesn't really matter. Right. So, you don't just come up with numbers and, kind of throw them out there. Like, unless you can say that your number is taking into account something that the market isn't, then, you shouldn't bother to kind of concoct these things. I think, that's a good thing to remember as we go into guessing the lines. It's like, this is often how I think about it. Like, I think I always try and make my line as best I can. And then if I differ from the market for a reason that I can actually put into words and say, this is something I don't believe the market is accounting for, then I'll bet it. If I can't, then I'm just wrong. Like, it's okay to be wrong in those situations too. It's getting back to that thing where you don't have to bet every single game. Like, it's good to say no to probably most bets.
Tying into that for me was this even happened during last season where, injuries, or I'll overreact to not even quarterbacks, but a good offensive tackle or a good edge rush or whatever. I think if you see it at a unit level to where it's actually multiple spots on the line, or it's going to be a third string guy, like maybe you can, but realistically 4 or 5 injuries that are non-quarterback is still maybe half a point, maybe a point, at most. But yeah, when you mentioned the quarterback thing, it made me think of our guy Gardner Minshew against the Cowboys last year, where they still put up 37 points. It was a great game. I want to say you did cover +5 or something like that in that game, but yeah, injuries notable. We're always going to mention them. But you do. The market knows that they're accounting for it as well as you are, unless I think you can say that there's now a knockdown effect for another reason beyond just that singular occurrence.
Yeah. I love that. And I love this example of Robbie. I think part of the reason for that, and Robbie and I have discussed this, is actually a kind of failure to quantify and separate scheme versus quarterback. It's something anecdotal that came to mind was why did Colt McCoy fill in so much better for Kyler Murray in 2021 when the surroundings were good as opposed to 2022? Of course, that's one example. It's anecdotal, but I think kind of gets to the point. So maybe, for our fellow press members who have some time on their hands, who want to dig into, scheme and trying to separate these things, I think that's kind of the next frontier of where there's a lot of edge to be had, because I don't think the markets, number one, they don't have the data for it. But also just like they're not, I don't think, pricing in scheme. And these are very difficult problems that I certainly would love to attack at some point. And maybe someone in the press will bless us with some insights to help us all out.
We've started to do that on the defensive side of the ball, right? Some of the man zone stuff that you've talked about, I think is a great example of where that can be valuable. And defense is just so much easier in this regard than offense, because defense is first off reacting to the offense, but also you're just going to see a lot less creativity on defense. Like, how many defensive coordinators are out there truly mixing things up from week to week? Like, there's a reason that you can say, hey, this is going to be a man game, this is going to be a zone game, because like that's just that's the way that the team is and is constructed. And offense, like, there's just so much going on, because you would also have to say a good scheme is going to adjust well to a new style of quarterback too, right? So it's not just about like plugging that quarterback into that scheme. It's like, if you had a backup that couldn't run like Jalen Hurts, but you plugged him in as a backup to the Eagles, I would still be bullish on them, because I don't think they're going to run him 12 times, right? Like, they're going to adjust well to the talent that they have around them. So I think that's also a good note to remember when presumably we get some sort of backup that comes in very shortly. Hopefully it's not Trey Lance, because that's the only one I'm going to fade.
Good luck 4-string quarterbacks out here.
Yeah. Now that only because you mentioned Trey Lance, I'm now going to look into my homework takeaway is we talked about the QB annual this year, which was incredible. And there was a Shanahan, classic Shanahan stat of basically yards per attempt on 0 graded throws. That's a thread that I'm going to pull on after the show. I mean, those quarterback are those teams, those offensive coordinators, play callers, if they have a backup come in, we already know they make things very easy on their quarterback. That obviously would apply to the backup, as well.
That's a good point, because guess who is number, I think, 10 on that list is Patrick Mahomes. So, the point that we always make, it's like, everyone looks at the highlight throws behind the back, shenanigans, but one of the main reasons he's so good is he hits every expected throw and makes a lot of them show up when they probably shouldn't, which is another really special thing. All right, that was our podcast. We'll be back with you on Sunday evening. We're only a few Sundays away from the glorious Sunday evening return of Guess the Lines. So we'll count that down, but we'll be back Sunday night. Thank you so much for hanging out. We love you all. Peace.